being as the International essentially operates as the World Championship, the premier event for Dota 2, the event that everyone wants to win, everyone wants to qualify for, and everyone wants to play in. And as fans, everyone wants to spectate. It's understandable for such a significant tournament why it's critical to have a discussion at all times about how many invitations should be given out, how many teams should qualify, what manner they should qualify. These sorts of structure and format questions aren't just something to ponder or something to debate over. I think they're actually quite important for progressing the sport or competition or field, the discipline, competitive discipline. And so as a result, I think it is an interesting discussion that should evolve, and from year to year, people should discuss how many invites is the correct number, or invitation. I'm more comfortable saying invitation in general over the word invite. Invite tends to be the term used at the moment. How many invites should there be to a tournament like this? Because obviously we want to have the best teams there, but we also want to allow teams to get through who might be very good within the period running up to the tournament, but maybe didn't play earlier on in the year if they didn't have their roster set. Because one of the key things about how the International has defined the Dota scene, the international Dota scene, is that obviously you've seen teams use the year both to try and qualify, but also to get their rosters in place for the International, where ideally everyone wants to peak and have their best performance. So the number of invites, the way they're going to be given out, which obviously was a big question and talking point in the past, is how were they given out, and teams essentially having to play a lot of events on the hopes they'd get an offer, depending on which ones they were successful at, and it not being entirely certain who would get the offers and for winning which events, because there was so much fuckery and so much vagueness to how the whole matter was set up. It's something that's always been vitally important to players, and it's always been discussed. So one of the main topics that seems to come up in this regard is people asking, should we have less invitations for the next international, for TI6? Now, first of all, before you consider that specific question for TI6 as a specific event, not just an abstract concept, should there be less invites in general, you have to go ahead and look at the fact that over the internationals, there has been a decrease in the number of invites, and there's been an increase in the number of teams that could qualify. So ignoring the international one, where obviously there wasn't a circuit and there wasn't a system where people could have qualified in that sense, because it was Dota 2's sort of coming out party to the world. It's how it was introduced. Instead, we'll look from TI2 onwards. So TI2, every tournament's been a tournament field of roughly 16. TI2 had 14 invites, and 2 qualifiers, just an East and a West qualifier. TI3 had 13 invites and 3 qualifiers, again, an East qualifier, a West qualifier, but a wild card. TI4 had only 11 invites, and it had 4 qualifiers, and then there were 4 teams that played in the phase 1. And so actually we're getting more similar to what we have now most recently at TI5, where the 16-team field at TI5 had the 10 teams invited, then 4 qualified, and then the last 2 spots, what happened was 4 teams went into a wildcard qualifier. They were all the teams that were the runners-up from the 4 regional qualifiers. Those teams went to a wildcard, and then 2 teams came out of the wildcard qualifier, and that made up the 16 overall. So by the time we get to TI5, less than 40% of the field are teams who just essentially qualified purely for TI5, not teams who accomplished anything significant over the year or had results which would suggest they should be invited or had the tenure to know that this is a team you have to have there. So that's actually a pretty decent amount there, because at the end of the day, we want the best teams to be playing at TI5. We want the teams who've been the champions over the year and who've already shown performance that suggests they're worthy of potentially winning TI5 to be the teams there. So that was quite a good breakdown, I thought. Now, in terms of the idea of wanting to have more wildcard teams, one of the things that's really made this and pushed this as even more of a relevant topic is the fact that the team that made it to the final, winning the upper bracket, CDEC, CDEC, was a team who came in through this wildcard qualifier. That's how they were able to get there. And the fact that they went all the way there does make it seem as though, okay, well, if this is the type of team that's possible to get through, then we have to take a serious look at this. We have to make sure that we're not locking teams like this out, and we're not making it impossible for teams like that to get there, because we don't want a team like that to be sat home, ideally, while a team that's a lesser team, who might have just done good 6 months earlier but aren't that good now, competes in the tournament and doesn't have a chance to win it. Okay, I can understand that argument. The problem with it is, yes, their success, their Cinderella story, their amazing story of qualifying and then making all the way through and having such amazing performances, it was a Cinderella story. I mean, you have to look at that and you have to say that was a one-off. And not only that, even in terms of outliers and one-offs, that was about as well as you could imagine it going. I mean, to think they made the final and they even beat the team who eventually would end up winning the final in a best of three, this is incredible stuff. You could never really have expected that. And I think it's unreasonable to have that expectation for other wildcard teams or teams qualifying and not being invited that they're going to do as well as that. Most likely, the teams that are invited that did well over the year, and that's why they've gotten their invites for performances over the year, they're going to, in general, perform better than most of the wildcard teams and have a better expectation of them doing better at the event and playing better Dota 2 than wildcard level teams. Because likewise, a lot of those wildcard level teams will have been around over the rest of the year and just simply could not perform to the same level or aren't good enough teams to actually have warranted an invite, essentially. So you can't just go and act as though every team's going to be a C deck, obviously. It's very unlikely that open qualifiers are going to perform to that level. Even when you get one of those teams that aren't even a top team and aren't even known who qualify through that system, it's more likely that they're going to have a miracle run through the qualifier and then actually drop off once they get to the main event. We've seen that many times when people have the miracle one-off run, they have the one big result maybe that gets them through, but then things regress to the mean. They average out to whatever their real level is, which probably wasn't that great before, and now they're just an okay team, and they'll be an also. Most of the wildcard teams in general, you would expect will end up being also runs at an event like this. So you don't want to fill too many in and take away teams that actually have championship pedigree. You've also got to look at the fact that the introduction of the majors rather, really means that I don't think it's as necessary to have more invites at an international. Because now using the majors, which are kind of mini internationals and serve a place of having an elite level competition that's just below the international, and yet every team wants to play in, means that how about have more invites, have less invites to stuff like majors, make it more qualifying for majors in that particular sense. That's where it makes sense. For me, the logic should be it's qualifiers for majors, get as many teams in there as you can just do qualifiers, and then if they're good, they'll place well at the majors. That can go into consideration for invites to TI 6 anyway, and then they essentially will use the good part of the invite system, which is you invite teams that have shown they're good and have accomplished things and shown that they're worthy of the caliber of a competition like the International 6, like a World Championship, and essentially majors themselves will become smaller qualifiers for the international. So to me, that makes more sense, to put the qualifiers there, to have a step between the international and pure open semi-pro amateur teams who might be good but hadn't overall been able to show the same level of quality. So the majors should take care of it in that particular respect, because if they're good enough, they'll prove it at those majors if they get to play there. Also, that allows us to essentially that will be error correcting for the invite system, to add an extra layer there, so it's not as abstract going back as many months on random competitions. Now we've got a few that definitely count more than others. Presumably the winner of every major would be invited anyway, so again, even a team who wouldn't otherwise be considered, if they go ahead and win a major, they're automatically pretty much going to get invited to the international. So it's a way of making the major a kind of an international qualifier, but that ends up qualifying you to the international. It's not just a regional thing again, because again, regional's good, but again, we don't want to set specific number of places based just on regions, because then a region's strength can mean that if the parity's off between regions, it maybe is kind of fucked up that, for example, in the case of CDC, maybe there are a lot of Chinese teams that may be good at one particular time, and they wouldn't otherwise have gotten through the qualification system or been invited. So by having them qualify into a major and then play it out there, they can prove there that they're good anyway, regardless of region. That's another benefit there. I think if anything, in general, even though I'm arguing against putting in more qualification spots, if you were to want to remove an invite, so let's say we do want to keep going down. So at TI2 we had 14 invites, TI3 we had 13, TI4 we had 11, TI5 we had 10. Say you said to me, can we just go down one or two more? I think an obvious way that you can take away an invite without ruining what's good about the invite system at the moment would be to take away an invitation from the winner of the last international. As in, winning the international should not get you auto-invited to the next one. Now, the reason why I say that is because last year was a perfect example. Essentially, newbie was automatically invited on the basis that they'd won the last international, also in fairly dominant fashion. But when you look at newbie and you look at the fact that they'd lost their star captain, who very much defined the style of the team, shoutout. Immediately, their team was going to be different. And they'd lost the star player, How, the main carry of the team, one of the best carries in the world. So when you've lost those two defining factors, the team, newbie, wasn't even close to their old form or their old style of team even, and the success from which positions they were going to have it from. So actually they themselves wouldn't have warranted an invite probably on those grounds anyway, and essentially were just given it on the basis of what they'd done the year before with a different lineup, despite the fact that over 2015 they didn't really warrant it from their accomplishments. So as a result, I think the reason why you remove the automatic invite from the winner of the last TI is that if they actually are good enough over 2015, they'll go to the tournaments, they'll prove it, and they'd get invited within the invite system anyway. So the invite system essentially has got that error checking within it and will take care of itself. So if Newbie had performed well enough, they would have been invited. It wouldn't be a problem if they had some wins, some really big second places, then they would have been invited. But they didn't, and that's why they weren't, except that they were auto-invited. And that's why it was a questionable one, and that's why actually I think logically you shouldn't automatically invite those teams. Now then, there's my general thoughts. I think the balance is about right at the moment. Like, you have all got like over 30% of teams are just qualifying and coming in and potentially being teams that haven't accomplished anything. So you still got a good mix of teams that come in and can just show their form at that one tournament. But you still got enough that you're rewarding the teams who did win tournaments and did show an excellent level of form over the year. Now then, I'd invite you to play Fantasy Esports at Alpha Draft, where they have plenty of international tournaments with games like Dota 2, and you can qualify to win money if you pick the right players on the right day. Now, if you can navigate the field like an evil genius, create the right alliance of players to beat the newbies of the field, and be able to say, I'm a G at this Fantasy Esports lark, Holmes, then play Alpha Draft if you want. Goodbye.